live now.
Great, thank you. This is Senate Gov Ops, and we are back on Thursday, January 19th. And we are going to go through S17. We have our Legislative Council attorney here, Tim Devlin, and he's just going to take a walk through the bill. And so if you have any questions about the language or any of the statutory issues, Tim's here to answer those before we get started taking testimony. And then we're going to talk about the plan and who we would like to have in, starting to line people up for next week. But we can talk about that after Tim is done. So take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. And I always like to kind of start these things with just kind of reading through the statement of purpose also introduced. And this should be relatively brief. There's really 5 sections of subsections. But this bill proposes to add subcategories of unprofessional conduct for law enforcement officers reviewable by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, or VCJC. It also prohibits sheriffs from collecting compensation for administration of contracts or related services. It proposes to repeal the penalty for refusal to assist a sheriff, and proposes to require the Secretary of State and the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs to review and report on the number of sheriff's departments. Going into a little bit more detail, and it is laid out, that is, the bill's laid out in the same order just presented. Section 1 modifies the law enforcement officer misconduct statutes, adding to the categories of misconduct that are reviewable by the CJC to include, quote, gross negligence or willful misconduct in the performance of duties and abuse of powers granted to law enforcement officers. Section 2 removes the sheriff's ability to collect 5% or really any contract administrative fees. Section 3 updates what we consider to be outmoded language with modern use of force language, tying it to usage in Title 20, Chapter 151. Where you find use of force language, amongst other things there. And that's also where you find the CJC language and misconduct language in the statutes. Section 4 repeals the penalty if a member of the public refuses to assist a sheriff. Section 5 asks the Secretary of State and the Department of State's attorneys, sheriffs, to report back to both the House Gov Ops and Military Affairs and Senate Gov Ops committees with findings and any recommendations for legislative action on 2 different items. 1, the necessary number of sheriff's departments in the state, and 2, the precise boundaries of any proposed district in which a sheriff department is to be reestablished. And then 6, sets these changes to become effective upon passage.
It says established, not reestablished.
Yes, it does. Sorry, that was being able to slip shot with my word.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for him? I'm gonna sort of, since I was the sort of lead sponsor on the bill in terms of getting the language drafting, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the intent behind some of it, and maybe that will lead to some questions. So if you don't mind sticking around for that, because as you know, there have been some issues around the state with sheriff's departments and the sort of a variety of issues. And sometimes it's administrative issues, sometimes it's law enforcement issues, and one of the more egregious instances happened in my own county. That led me to want to look at the statutes related to sheriffs, and a lot of the statutes related to sheriffs have not been updated for decades. Some of them, I remember 1974 was the last time they had been looked at. So some of the language was just outdated, and some of the sort of conduct that was overseen didn't cover the conduct that we were seeing from sheriffs. So that's why on page 2, the gross negligence or willful misconduct in the performance of duties and abuse of powers granted through law enforcement officer certification are added, because some of the things that we've seen happen particularly in Addison County would be related to these kinds of behaviors and abuse of powers. So that was the sort of thinking behind that. And I don't really want to go into the gory details of what happened in Addison County, but there are other issues around the state that are different. And then the contract language related to the 5% contracting language. I think it's fair to say that sheriff's departments have a different interpretation of this. And some of them use it to, cover the administrative fees of a contract, just like a lot of other contracts have administrative fees or overhead sort of percentages. And that's fair and sort of seems okay. But then some of them use it to, the sheriff themselves would use it to increase their own compensation. And some of them use it for a mix of the two. So this is to get the conversation going about the contracting language related to sheriff's departments. I had asked him to do a little bit of research and to see if any other office in the state in statute had this type of authority or provision, and there was none that he could find, and I'll let you speak to that. But this seemed like a unique sort of thing that was granted to sheriffs, and it seemed worthy of a longer conversation about the 5% allowable in contracts. Senator Clarkson.
So, and the 5% is not in the Constitution, just the position of sheriff is in the Constitution.
Yeah, and I'll get to that in just a minute, the sort of constitutional issues.
So this 5%, just while we're on this section, and it is fair to be, I think it's fair that the whole compensation for sheriffs has been not necessarily well handled by the state from day one. I mean, it has been kind of an outlier in the public safety arena, and is only compensated by the state for one aspect of their work. So I think the whole compensation piece with sheriffs is part of what needs to be reviewed. And I think sheriffs whole feel similarly. I mean, it's just, they've always been,
yeah,
it's a challenge.
The sort of financial operations of a sheriff's department are not what they maybe should be. So we're, I think that this is language to help open that conversation. The duties of a police officer, this language, as you can see what's crossed out, is pretty old language. And given the work that the legislature did a few years ago about use of force, this it literally said that shall preserve the peace and suppress with force and strong hand, if necessary, unlawful disorder. So that is really contrary to a lot of the work that we've done recently about use of force and chokeholds and all the work we've done. So this just allows it to be in compliance or consistent with the use of force statute that we passed a few years ago. And then the penalty for refusal to assist a sheriff. Can you speak to that? Because I can't remember what it said, but it was also fairly outdated language.
Well, how is that an issue?
There was a monetary penalty associated with refusing to cooperate with a sheriff if that sheriff were to kind of call upon somebody for assistance in disrupting or stopping any sort of that is a very old, I think it actually comes from England duty, that sheriffs have traditionally had to call upon members of the public to help them. It seems pretty unique to this position and can be distinguished from other types of issues which are somewhat similar but not really related, having to do with liability for members of the public wanting to help or a police officer's duty to help. But this is actually pretty unique here, and this basically just removes any sort of penalty and thus any obligation to assist the sheriff as a member of the public if requested to.
And there was not a similar provision or penalty for not assisting, you know, a municipal police officer or a state trooper. It was just unique to sheriffs, and it was, as Tim said, pretty outdated language. So that's why that's what that repeals. And then the review of the sheriff's departments, this has come up in conversations about, you know, how many sheriffs do we need and where those sheriff's boundaries of the districts should be. Right now they're by county, and I believe there's one per county, and that is not in the Constitution, unlike our districts, the legislative districts that are sort of somewhat defined in the Constitution. The sheriff districts are not. So this was just an opportunity to hear, is this the best way of deploying, you know, local or regional law enforcement throughout the state, or are there boundaries that make more sense given geography and population numbers and stuff? So this is just a report back about that. And one of the things that I discovered in working on this bill, and this was what Senator Clarkson was alluding to, is that sheriffs are constitutional officers in that they were created and are named in the Constitution. And because of that, you know, they are duly elected officials that we as the legislature can't impose mandates on. We are not given the authority within the Constitution to impose any requirements of the office. We can regulate their elections, so that's, you know, the boundaries of where they're elected, but we can't regulate, you know, say that they have to be a certified law enforcement officer, for example. That was one thing that Senator Sears and I considered doing, was making a requirement that a sheriff has to be a certified law enforcement officer, and that is not something that we can actually require. So, for example, the sheriff in my district lost his certified law enforcement certification. He lost his certification, but he still was the sheriff. So that is something that came up, and sort of like the limits of what we are able to do legislatively because of constitutional requirements. And the only way to remove a sheriff, just like the only way to remove pretty much any other elected official, is through impeachment, which is a very long, complicated process that hasn't actually, I don't think, successfully been completed since the 1790s, is what I was told this morning. So it's been a while. So wow. Yeah, there have been attempts, I believe in the 1970s, there was an impeachment process, but I don't think it went through for the full trial and things like that. So hold on just a second. And so we may be also looking at constitutional provisions. So we'll put a pin on that, but that may be a related conversation to this. Senator Watson.
I have not been following super closely all of things that have been happening with sheriffs, though I know that there have been issues. What are the chances that we might have any kind of impeachment come before us this?
I don't know. I don't think we will. Okay. It's not my decision to make, though, and I haven't been directly involved in those conversations. It would start in the House.
Yeah, it has to begin.
So impeachment proceedings would happen in the House, and that they would have to draft articles of impeachment, just like we've seen at the federal level, and then it would come over to the Senate, and we would be the trial. It would be like a trial. It would be extremely time-consuming, and so I don't think we will be doing it, but I don't know for sure. And Tim, did you want to say anything to add or refute anything I said if I incorrectly characterized anything?
I would have to confirm that, yes, changing the qualifications for office for sheriff would require a constitutional amendment. Let's see. The Constitution does spell out a few different instances of requirements for sheriffs in written language, bonding, when they're to be elected, for what terms, but aside from that, nothing like that.
Okay, thank you. Senator White, did you?
Yes, I did have a question, which is one of a separate incident. There are multiple sheriff-related scenarios that seem to have unfolded over the last few years in Vermont for different reasons. And one that is not particular to Windsor County, but a different county, is confirming whether or not the sheriff themselves resides in the place that they are meant to be.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So this,
Yeah, how, does this have any implications on that? Is that a separate thing?
yeah, I will say something and then I'll let Tim weigh in, but we did look at the possibility of making a requirement that a sheriff have to be, live in Vermont to be a sheriff. And even that seemed maybe suspect, so we didn't have it. That's a requirement that we can't add to,
Okay.
the office of sheriff.
That's not an elections requirement?
Yeah, that's what.
I
I think to be
will let
elected
our
anyway.
council answer that.
To be elected, you have to be an eligible voter, but then if you leave state afterwards, during the rest of the tenure of your office, that's,
Hey, 4 years, lucky sheriffs and state's attorneys and probate judges.
the means to remove them from office would remain impeachment.
Yeah.
So that was the issue. I thank you for clarifying that. That's a very good distinction that I hadn't made. And Senator Watson.
Oh, so if we were gonna add something like that, it would take a constitutional.
Correct,
Amendment.
which is
Yeah.
why that might be a consideration,
Yeah.
because this is one of the year, this biennium.
Yeah.
We could do a constitutional amendment,
Yeah.
depending on
Okay.
where this goes.
And I just want to acknowledge and say that Senator Norris is a former sheriff, and I am extremely excited that you're part of this conversation, and I don't ever want this to be awkward for you. And so if you have something to add now or anytime, please feel free. I would imagine, I don't want it to be uncomfortable.
And you are our authority of knowledge in many ways.
Well, Tim's gonna be our authority, but, well, let me just address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Such as the chair just had mentioned that, yes, I was a sheriff for 20 years, but my purpose in looking at this bill from a positive aspect is I am not here to defend bad characters. So know this now, okay? But I am here, I'll tell you quite honestly, to defend the office of sheriff, which I take pride in. And unless we can come up with valid reasons as to why we should change things within the office, rather than to add things or responsibilities to the office with a little more control over them, then, it's gonna be a long day for us, at least for me. But I'm not here to represent bad characters. I do not. And we've had a few. But
Yeah,
having said
Right,
that,
but you're.
but having said, well, technically, he's not the sheriff. But having said that, unfortunately, there have been bad characters in most every aspect of law enforcement throughout the country. And what's been happening recently with the sheriffs within the state of Vermont is, it's unfortunate, but it also shines a bad light on law enforcement and the totality of the circumstances throughout Vermont. And that's the part that bothers me.
Mhm.
So we need to address certain things, I believe. I caution you, and we'll get into it.
Mhm.
I just caution you as to how valuable the particular position that the services that are offered throughout the county are to our community members, to other agencies within the state, as far as transports and whatever else are concerned. So let's remain, such as I'm going to, open-minded about this. Let's not just say, bad sheriffs, bad law enforcement. Let's approach this as elected officials with the responsibility that was given to us by our constituents.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And that's my intention, that, the reason the bill exists is because there have been a lot of incidents that are troubling, or enough incidences that are troubling. And I think it's worth our conversation as a government operations committee, because it seems that at least part of government isn't operating well, and we want to make sure it does operate well for the citizens and the residents of Vermont. Do you have anything to add about the language in the bill or the legal background or anything like that?
Nothing to add, but happy to
Okay.
answer any questions now or at a later point.
Okay. Senator Vigos?
Hi, I have a language question. So here where it reads that the sheriff may apprehend without warrant individuals assembled in disturbance of the peace, blah, blah, blah. Is that the same as in other law enforcement codes? And do we typically treat disturbance of the peace as a criminal issue?
That is a good question. I don't know how it's treated with other law enforcement positions. It's, I can certainly look
Okay.
into that.
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I did notice when we were going over the statement of purpose, there's one thing missing. The use of force part of it. I believe is missing in there. I mean, to the extent that the statement of purpose matters.
Well, it's courts go to the statement of purpose and
Yeah.
to intent. So, you know, people make fun of them, but actually I think they're very important.
Yeah,
And they
well,
set up a bill.
and as the bill changes, that will change as well, the statement of purposes. So just to let everyone know the sort of loose plan, we're Senator Bukowski and Olivia and I, as you know, meet on Thursdays to do our agenda. So in our agenda planning today, we sort of looked at some of the big issues that we want to cover as a committee, and to try to sort of map out what we're going to do. So we're going to try to take a big issue each day of the week, and then have sort of fluff time after to fit in little things, like if we get a small little charter that we need to move along or something like that. And obviously, this is the best laid plans, and it will certainly change, but this is what we're going to try to do. So since this is we have two bills, but the other one is a little bit smaller, and I think we'll deal with that as well, but not immediately about the auditor. So next Tuesday, we're going to start some testimony on this bill, and we're going to have we're going to have John Campbell back from State's Attorney and Sheriff's Department. We're going to have the Sheriff's Association, Roger Marcoux and Mark Anderson, and who was the third one? Oh, we're going to have the auditor's office in, because sheriffs are audited by the auditor's office, and they're the auditor's office right now, specifically when sheriffs change, there's a special audit that happens as one sheriff is exiting and a new sheriff is coming on board. And so we're going to get some information about that process and some of the findings that they've had through their audit process. So that's the plan for next Tuesday.
So long-term, as you plan out the witnesses for this bill,
Mhm.
we probably might also want to hear from our constitutional experts like Peter T. Chow or Betsy Ann Rath, or, you know, the people we have close at hand on the constitutional aspects of it.
Tim and I will work on that and try to figure out the best person for that. Are there other people that the committee would like to hear from, Bob in particular, or excuse me, sorry, Senator Norris?
The only thing that I ask for as we progress through the examination of the bill here, whatever else, if in fact myself or any other member does come up with a name, that we have that opportunity to speak to you about it and have him or her come in and testify.
And have who?
Him or her come in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you have people that you would like to testify on this bill or any bill, please come and talk to me about it. And then we can have a conversation about where and how that person fits in. And then I can work with Olivia to get that person scheduled. So please don't just invite people without going through me, because our schedule is super tight and we have a lot to cover, and I need to know who our witnesses are.
And I would say who, but I don't know what direction the bill is going in right now, so that's why.
Oh, yeah, but it'll
we've been
occur to
discussing-
you.
You're right.
Yeah, and we'll keep talking. You know, I want to make sure that everybody feels heard and involved in the conversation.
So I think also as we go into this bill, the other key people to hear from are VLCT and the towns that contract, because part of this is the so I think we need to hear from the town, you know, a couple key towns that contract, and VLCT and Department of Corrections, because the one job we pay them for is transport.
2 jobs, but
two jobs,
No,
sorry.
also-
service of civil
Court.
process.
And courthouse. And
Courthouse is an option, that's, they may.
they don't
Yeah.
have to, because we've already seen, I mean, really problematic, the reduction of them using the sheriffs for courthouse work. So
Yeah,
that's been a problem.
what did you mention as the second thing? The,
Service of civil process,
Serving,
civil process.
It's not like
serving
you've been served.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the sheriffs do.
so,
Which the state receives, it's funny, but the state receives 15% compensation from the service of civil process back into the general fund through sheriffs, so just keep that in mind when we start.
oh, that's, I see where you're going with that.
Just saying.
No, that's why this compensation of the sheriffs is a thorny and has been put together poorly over the
Yeah.
hundreds of years.
So just so you know, Tim and I we spent a lot of time looking at, or I spent a lot of time, and then I would ask him about it, at the statutes that are about county budgets and how county budgets are put together, because sheriffs are one of the only,
One of the key.
they are the biggest part of a county budget, and then the side or the side judges,
Yes,
what's
the assistant
assistant
judges
judges, I was like, that's not the
put
right
that
word.
budget
The
together.
assistant judges put the budget together. So, you know, I looked at a lot of that and the sort of county budget. So that is an area that we can sort of look at as well.
As we look at compensation, I'd add the assistant judges or whoever puts together, yeah, they put the budget
Do you
together.
know if there's
for
an
every county.
assistant judges association or anything?
Yes.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that might be.
Yeah.
Do you happen
I
to?
don't know who it is in
think-
Washington, who the assistant judges in Washington County.
Oh, I think it's Leah Murphy Jones and.
We know who ours are.
I know who mine are, but I mean, I've dealt with them
Yeah,
for
well,
20
if there's
years.
an association, then we would have that
Yeah.
officially, so.
All
All right, anyone else? I don't want to keep Tim because we're getting into different non-legal things, but
Oh, the Department of Public Safety, because they
Yeah.
are a piece of the compensation. The county is a piece of their compensation. The towns are a piece of their compensation.
The SDA represents some sheriffs. Would we want to make sure that they had space to weigh in?
they represent the
Transport sheriffs.
transport sheriffs.
That's basically it would be SCA, and we just barely passed that last year with S220, so.
Yeah.
Like I said, I want to make sure that anyone who thinks they need a space in the room gets a space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could ask them if they want to come in. I don't know if they would.
They may not want to, but
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's the swag from the Secretary of State.
Yeah, we have that
The
county-
Constitution and a state. plan.
the updated constitution.
I know, I know.
checked for both of our new.
Updated Constitution. All right, so Tim, anything else to add or suggestions from you about who we might want to hear from?
Nope, nothing to add.
Okay, if you can think about legal scholars, constitutional experts that specifically might be helpful, that would be helpful.
Sure, I guess.
You can ask Director Carby. Excellent, well, thank you for being here. We'll see you again soon, I think. I have one more thing to talk to the committee about. And thank you, Tim.
Thank you all very much.
22 should be in here.
Article 22 is in there and Article 2 has been edited.
Updated, excellent, the new and improved state constitution. So,
Article 22 is
thank you for-
1850.
At the beginning, not subsection 22 article.
It says Article
Oh,
22,
interesting, right at the very beginning.
55.
we take the
Page 9.
Constitution seriously in here in the Government Operations Committee. And we are live on YouTube talking about it. So, we, thank you for that conversation and the suggestions about witnesses. I think it's gonna be interesting and, we will, have a robust conversation and, thank you for that. Senator Clarkson?
I do have the open meeting law. It's being drafted. Anybody who like to take a peek at where Tucker's almost ready for it. I did contact John O'Dwyn, who does do trainings in distributed teams. He's one of the country's experts on online training and online work. And we happen to work with him in Senate Economic Development on digital corporations and on a remote worker bill. And so we had a relation to, and Homer reminded me, we had John as a So, any thoughts you have on those, on the trainings, we can make sure we have that. But an open meeting bill is making its way.
Excellent.
And one of my questions is, as you meet with your counterparts in the House, where are we beginning the elections bills? Do we anticipate, other than ranked choice voting coming here?
So that the House is doing a sort of miscellaneous elections bill.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And they're starting that over there, and then we're doing ranked choice voting, and we may add things to that,
Okay.
assuming that the committee is all good with it. And then we'll swap, and then we'll both have a voting bill that we can use. We'll swap, that's how it works. Right?
Yeah, that's
But
what
the thing I wanted to
crossover is all
talk to you
about.
about was the Secretary of State in their presentation reminded me, their suggestion to go see the Vermont State Archives, which I've never gone to.
Oh, I love to see.
And I think it would be kind of a fun field trip for the committee. I know that some other committees are taking field trips. I haven't specifically asked the pro tem, but I believe that we may have the ability to do 1 or 2 field trips as a committee. I thought it would be fun. So that's one option, that I think would be fun and easy. But if there are other things that we want to see, maybe there's something sheriff related we want to see. I don't know what that would be, but if there are things, if you want to think about it and let me know, and we can go see things in our government operating in action outside of the State House. It might be helpful for us to do that. So let me know if you have any ideas about what you would like to see.
I love the idea of going to archives.
Yeah, I think that sounded cool. Maybe they'd let us ride on the forklift.
Because I haven't
Do you
been.
need a special license to drive a forklift?
I don't know.
You do?
She said she-
Yeah.
You need a forklift operator's license, not that I've.
Okay, so Senator White, can you get on that? So
I'm
that
gonna
when you
get on
go, you can drive. us
I'm
in it.
very much related.
Do you have a
to
forklift
operator's
Is it
license.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Of course you do.
Got our driver.
I drove a forklift at a paper mill for 9 years,
That's
both
excellent. Okay.
propane and electric.
I have a
See,
CDL, so I can drive us around and
I don't
In
have
a
a seat.
truck.
That's a
in a
short
short
one.
bus.
Sure, bus or like a van.
Okay, so Senator Watson can drive us in a short bus down to the archives, and then when we get there, Senator Norris can drive the forklift that
Sounds
we get
good.
to be lifted up on.
And then we take
He's like, no, I'm not signing up for that.
No lifting on it, no lifting.
Would you lose your license? I know we're allowed.
Well, not technically, I have a license. I have 9 years of experience of driving forklift. I don't know of any license needed to drive a forklift.
Well, you need
All right.
to do it for, well.
So now that we've,
But I've been
got
breaking
this
the
out
law.
there, that
And what we're doing is sharing with the public all the skills and talents. this
the
committee
skills and
has.
talents of the members of the Government Operations Committee, the different licenses that we have. It's pretty interesting. You have a teaching license too, so you could teach us
That's
how
right.
to.
Well,
She has a street
Secondary
license. You have a
science or
teacher's
math.
license.
Teach us
I have
the
no
physics of how forklifts
Exactly,
work.
that I could do.
Yeah.
I have a driver's
Um,
license.
Okay, we are digressing big time. So let me know about field trips. And I think that's it for today.